I'm gonna be completely honest, I've nearly lost motivation to do this video because of audio issues. It's been a while. Those of you who are watching this video may have already seen my shorts content. I started doing that recently. Haven't made a long-form video since I started doing that, but I hope you guys enjoy the shorts and the long-form stuff as much as I enjoy making them. Alright.
In part 3 of our series, we showed how false interpretation geology, which overthrew flood
Is this a series? Fuck.
geology, was based on a false interpretation of the rock layers, because there's ample evidence of massive rapid deposition rather than
No, there is not. I may have actually already, dealt with that video, but he proved absolutely none of the sort.
slow sedimentation having occurred. And neocatastrophism, which replaced uniformitarianism because of its lack of sufficient explanatory power, cannot.
Okay, putting it that way is really, really fucking misleading. That is ultimately why any model replaces any other model, is because the new model explains stuff better. But putting it that way makes it sound like the old model was, absolutely completely inaccurate from the beginning, which is just not true. It may have been wrong about a couple things, but the way science works is we replace the old with the new, and the new is always a better explanation or a more accurate explanation, or both. That's how science works.
Account for the uniform and continuous nature of the vast majority of the rock layers that we observe.
It's uniform and continuous because time is uniform and continuous.
We then asked, why won't scientists simply return to the Genesis account of Noah's flood and a corresponding literal 6-day creation?
Because there is absolutely no fucking evidence of that. Sorry, I just smacked my mouse on accident. There's absolutely no evidence of a global flood. Absolutely nothing. If there was a global flood, like this guy so clearly thinks there would be an immense amount of evidence for that. But there is none. There's no evidence of that, because it didn't fucking happen, dude.
Creation, a model that can account for all of the observable evidence as the better explanation, to which we'll now give a response. However, we should also ask, why was there a push to abandon the Mosaic account as Charles Hodge described in part 1 in the first place? And
God, he's referencing all the other parts, and I definitely am not doing these in order.
the answer to both questions is what we'll reveal in our final treatment.
I had taken this world religions class in college that exposed me to every different religion.
I conceived the idea 5 or 6 years ago that if ever the Mosaic geology could be set
And here we are again with completely outdated quotes, for fuck's sake.
down without giving offense, it would be in an historical sketch. And you must abstract mind in order to have as little to say as possible yourself. Let them feel it and point the moral. What
Okay, I want everybody to remember that this quote is very nearly 1.5 centuries old. People back then, and I can't believe I have to say this, could have been wrong about things. What Answers in Genesis does so very often is they'll either quote mine a modern quote, or they'll take a completely outdated quote that agrees with their stance, but like, most of the time, like, the people who agreed that God existed back then were just, they just believed that because it was the thing that everybody believed. Science back then hadn't disproven the Bible as much as it has now. So a lot of the scientists back in the late, or actually, a lot of the scientists around and before the mid 20th century, so around and before 1950, for the most part, believed in God because science hadn't so heavily disproved the Bible like it has now. I need you to understand that back in the 1800s, it was around the time of the birth of like many fields of science. Most fields of science do not go back before the 1800s. And if they did, they were incredibly wrong because of false conclusions. It's people were wrong. We're not saying that every scientist throughout history was right, because science accepts the fact that sometimes it's wrong, unlike biblical creation.
Welcome to the inner thoughts of one of the most influential, although less known amongst the average, individuals in modern history, Sir Charles Lyell. As many
Calling literally the mid to, the dude was born before the 1800s even began. How can you call that modern history when talking about science? It's really misleading. Like, technically, yeah, it's modern history, but not when it comes to science.
mentioned previously in parts 1 to 3, and as shown in the quote, he was instrumental as how the Mosaic account relating to geology was undermined quite deliberately. We can now not only know what Lyell's skills and accomplishments.
Nobody undermined it deliberately. I assume the Mosaic account is what he's talking about, like in the Bible with the flood being the cause. But nobody was actively going after the Bible. You realize that, right? Nobody was actively going after the Bible. They were just proving it in the truthful way, and it just so happens that the Bible wasn't fucking truthful. Nobody has ever been going after the Bible when they're doing their fucking research into science. It just happened that way because, believe it or not, what I heard it described as a Iron Age horror anthology, which is really fucking funny to me. That was said by Forrest Valkai. Um, and yeah, it's nobody was ever going after the Bible. They just disproved it over the course of being honest. That's all it was.
Were, but we can also know his motives and methods to a great extent, particularly because of the access we now have to his own and other specific individuals of his day he interacted with writings. Lyell was an anti-Christian lawyer by profession, who later became.
Okay, maybe somebody was, but I'd like to point out that if somebody is going after your religion and is effectively proving that it's not true, digging your heels in and saying that he was a fucking liar is just not an honest way of thinking. It's not an honest way of conversation. It's not an honest way of thinking. Like, if you're wrong, you should be able to admit that you're wrong. And that's the issue that Answers in Genesis has, is that when they are proven wrong, they just double down and call the other person a liar. Or they completely quote mine the other person's quotes to make it sound like they agree with Answers in Genesis. Which, literally every time I've seen it happen, it has not been the case. So,
became a geologist. And although Charles Darwin is often thought of as the man who managed to bring about the Darwinian revolution that overthrew the Christian religion,
only Christians think that way. Literally, only Christians think that way. Because it's hard, impossible even, to consider anything other than dogma when you believe in dogma. I've seen this way more times than I'd rather see it. When Answers in Genesis treats Darwin as our Jesus. He's not. He was a dude who lived over 100 years ago and was wrong about a lot of things, but he just so happened to be right about enough things to start a field of science. And I assure you, starting a field of science back when there were barely any fields of science is not a grand achievement. He stumbled upon the truth and looked into it. That's all that happened.
religion as the dominant worldview, Lyell's working behind the scenes were integral to the entire scheme. Now, I don't use
Didn't those people never fucking meet each other? Give me a second. I don't remember what the dudes. Oh, whoops. Get rid of that. I really gotta separate this shit. Did Lyle and Darwin ever meet? Apparently I fucking spelled his name wrong. After Darwin returned from his voyage on the Beagle, 1836. When did Charles Darwin start researching evolution? Charles Darwin had already been researching evolution before he met Lyell. And believe it or not, Lyell and Darwin, because I'm pretty sure Lyell was the guy who coined the term selective artificial selection. I think he was the guy who was researching artificial selection. Possibly. I don't have a good memory of what both of those people did. But I'd like to point out that researchers in the same field talk to each other. They talk to each other and they share their findings. They were both on the path to discovering truth. Whether that's in the way of your bullshit lies or not, it's the truth nonetheless.
the term scheme in an offhand fashion. Although many people are under the impression that scientists simply found the evidence of millions of years in the rocks, which then simply discredited the Genesis account by fiat, Lyell was actually the instigator of a much larger and more purposeful plan than most people are even aware of.
Okay. Science corrects itself. If, and I cannot stress this enough, if literally any of the evidence supported your bullshit creationist worldview, I can guarantee you that scientists would have flipped it and started backing that. But they didn't. They're backing evolution because evolution is real and it's what the fucking evidence points to.
Aware of, especially Christians. And the evidence for that is plain to see in the aforementioned quote.
No, it is not.
Although written in an antiquated style somewhat foreign to modern ears, what he was saying here is that if what Moses wrote about Noah's flood, commonly understood to be the explanation of the rock layers found around the world, could
I'm gonna go back to that quote. So, and I'm gonna read it for myself again because I've watched way too many of these videos to trust him in what he is saying. 3:21. Okay.
could be
So let's go back to that quote because I wasn't paying attention when he brought it up. Here it is. Oh, wait. I conceived the idea 5 or 6 years ago that if ever
could be
the
set down
mosaic
without giving
geology could be set down without
offense. It would be
giving offense. So I conceived 5 or 6 years ago could be set down without giving offense. I'm not quite sure what set down means, but I guess what he means is thrown out.
in an historical sketch. And you must abstract mind in order to have as little to say as possible yourself.
Okay. I believe what he's saying here is if you could throw out the Bible's account without getting people angry, you would have to put it in plain and simple terms. And I think what he's saying here is that his research is not plain and simple.
Let them feel it and point the moral.
Yeah, it's pretty much just to get this shit thrown out without getting people in an uproar, it needs to be in layman's terms.
Welcome to the inner thoughts of one of the most
I'm not very good with Old English, if you couldn't tell.
influential, although show we now is the religion who
It was 321.
written here to be the alternate history of the rock layers found around the world.
Was it not 321? It was 321.
Could be repeated. What he was saying here is that if what Moses wrote about Noah's flood, commonly understood to be the explanation of the rock layers found around the world, could be replaced with an alternate history regarding the age of said rocks, it
No, just thrown out without an uproar. Not replaced, thrown out because it isn't true.
would undercut the entire Bible. Lyle's background in law
I didn't get any sort of shit about the Bible from that quote. I may be wrong. I may have misunderstood the quote. But I'm pretty sure that wasn't talking about the Bible.
had equipped him to argue persuasively. And he knew the Victorians of the day wouldn't stand for direct attack on the church. So his plan was to use seemingly inoffensive and scientific arguments from geology to discredit the history in the Bible.
No, oh my fucking god. I have no reason to believe this guy was anti-religion in the first place. The only guy who's actually said that is this motherfucker, and he lies on a fucking regular schedule. It could have entirely been the case that Charles Lyell just wanted people to understand the truth.
All very much on purpose. Charles Darwin was greatly influenced by the uniformitarian principles outlined in Lyell's Principles of Geology, which he read on his famous voyage on the Beagle, where he supposedly discovered the story of evolution. In fact, it was through the deep time spectacle.
Dude, the snide remarks, the ever so slight, just the way in which he speaks, it drives me up the fucking wall. Because he doesn't actually listen to the other side of the argument. He just repeats the other side of the argument. It's like when a kid says something contrary to another kid on a playground, and then the other kid just goes me, like in that kind of voice, and repeats what the kid said in a way that just is mocking, you know? It it really does feel like every time I watch one of these videos by Answers in Genesis, it really does just feel like he's some brat on a playground who doesn't know how to play with others, you know?
He donned while reading Lyell's work, that he began speculating as to what long ages might accomplish in living organisms, given enough time. So, Principles of Geology was what supplied Darwin's imagination with the required millions of years landscape that evolution demanded.
Okay, so he is trying to portray evolution as circular reasoning, but that's not how the discovery of evolution actually worked. And it's not how we back up evolution now either. Um, the way it worked was Lyle went, "Hey, what if it could be millions of years in this geology?" And then Charles Darwin went out and observed the variation of species and was like, if this happened like over a large amount of time, it could be an entirely new species. And I want you to remember that Answers in Genesis admits that microevolution exists. And what microevolution is just small changes over the course of time. Macroevolution is microevolution over the course of a very long time. And I want you to understand that after they came up with that hypothesis, it was further proved by modern geology and other modern fields of science that the Earth is millions of years old. It was proven with modern science. It was not circular reasoning. We got to the ideas first, and then we proved it after. I want that to be clear. We came up with the idea, aka the hypothesis, and then we proved it afterwards. It may have taken decades, but we still proved it afterwards. That is much more than I can say about the bullshit creationism that these motherfuckers peddle. Their whole fucking worldview is based on circular reasoning. Their whole worldview is the Bible is true because the Bible says that it's true. I want you to understand that. Because absolutely none of the scientific evidence backs up the idea that the world is only, what do they say it is? Like 6,000 or 9,000 years old? All of the evidence points to that not being true.
Mans. He later became friends with Lyle upon his return to England, and obviously became privy to and embroiled in his cultural machinations. In a letter,
Okay, I can't let this stand because this guy is completely portraying these guys as evil, religion hating demons. And it's like, dude, you have proved absolutely none of the sort. You have not given a single piece of evidence that these people were actively attacking religion. Not a single bit. And the from what I know, Charles Darwin struggled with the fact that he found that religion was not necessary, specifically biblical creation. He was struggling with the fact that it wasn't true because he was a devout believer. He found the truth and he was struggling with throwing away the lies. That's what happened with Charles Darwin. And he's portraying Charles Darwin as a fucking oh, what's the word? Fuck. He is portraying Charles Darwin as an accomplice. And he's given absolutely no evidence of the sort.
to his son George, Darwin commented on Lyle and his clear motivation and strategy to damage Christianity. Lyle is most firmly convinced that he has shaken the faith in the deluge far more efficiently by never having said a word against the Bible than if he had acted otherwise.
And there they just prove themselves wrong. They just used a quote that said Charles Lyell never said a word against the Bible. He was never actively trying to prove the Bible wrong. He just did it because it was a random side effect of discovering the truth. You realize what that means, right? It means Lyle shook people's faith because he was following the truth, not because he was outwardly denying the Bible, but because he just simply found the truth and just so happened to be contrary to the Bible.
Never having said a word against the Bible than if he had acted otherwise. I have read lately that direct attacks on Christianity produce little permanent effect. Real good seems only to follow the slow and silent side attacks.
Which is basically just saying, follow science, because eventually, once people are learning about science, they won't have a need to believe in a religion in the first place. That's all that means. Legitimately. Dropping religion from the conscious mind is a result of finding out the truth. Religion is spawned from not understanding the world around you. That's what it is. That's what it's from. That's why people seek solace in religion. But the more you understand about the world, the more you will understand that a crutch like religion is simply unnecessary.
As Darwin pointed out, Lyle, cunning enough to know there would be significant resistance from the church should he be too obvious, focused on seemingly scientific and intellectual arguments rather than overtly theological ones.
Basically, what he's saying here is the dude focused on his research and spoke to people about his research. What the hell is so sinister about that, dude? What the hell is sinister about researching the truth and simply telling people about the truth?
He was also clever enough to seek allies from the more liberal wing of the clergy, who were more likely to compromise to help him accomplish his goal. The following quote, where he's in
Basically, he talked to people of the religion and helped them deconstruct it. That's all he did. He talked to people of a certain religion that he knew was untrue, and he helped them deconstruct their faith. Genuinely, what is sinister about that?
encouraging a friend of his to publish some of his work in a popular publication of the day shows these tactics
AKA doing his fucking job.
on full display. If we don't irritate, which I fear that we may, though mere history, we shall carry all with us. If you don't triumph over them, but compliment the liberality and candor of the present age, the bishops and enlightened saints will join us in despising both the ancient and modern physico-theologians. It is just the time to strike, so rejoice that, sinner as you are, the quarterly review is open to you. Again, the more Shakespeare.
Basically, he's just saying, though they may call you a sinner, you are following the truth. That's pretty much all he said.
Shakespearean language might prove more difficult to understand, but he was clearly
Yeah, which is why it's so easy for you to spin it however you want. Isn't that right? Because that quote earlier, from what I could understand, said absolutely nothing about the Bible. Said absolutely nothing about the Bible. Only the Mosaic account.
emphasizing what Darwin's letter regarding Lyell's shrewd plan entailed, i.e., not to insult the church writings or to lord these ideas over them. And
Baseless slander.
by working with those who were willing to bend the plain reading of Scripture already inside the church, to help with those who insult the church writings or to lord these ideas over them. And by working with those who were willing to bend the plain reading of Scripture already inside the church, to help popularize these ideas and help overcome the more staunch.
Ah, yes. In other words, basically just getting people who understand that what they're peddling is bullshit to not peddle bullshit.
Bible defenders who were likely to detect the logical and inevitable theological outworking of removing Genesis's real history, it bought him time to.
Yeah, honestly, I think I'm gonna end this video here. Because it doesn't seem like he's gonna say anything, anything more than just baseless slander. So yeah. If you keep coming back, subscribe. If not, I don't really give a shit.